from a lay-by just outside Keswick. As you know, heading north, more to come. So for this trip, it turns out north was quite north, and quite a lot to the west as well, with our destination, in case you hadn't already guessed, being the Outer Hebrides. So first, before we get into the meat of the video, I've got a couple of recommendations for anybody thinking of mimicking this trip. First of all, visit outerhebrides.co.uk. Some really good resources, especially for van travellers on there. Some downloadable maps, and also a facility where you can upload information into your Google Maps, which is great. The other thing being our Robbie Rome's guidebook. So we watched their video on YouTube. It was excellent about the Hebrides, and then we bought the guidebook. Thoroughly recommended, and again geared very much towards van travellers. It's about 15 quid. Links are on the screen. So our trip starts in the North Hebrides and in the Isles of Lewis and Harris, famous for a couple of things. Harris tweed, of course, important because otherwise the aristocracy could walk among us unseen, and the Lewis chess pieces. Prior to heading across to Stornoway in the Hebrides, we overnight in Ullapool, thanks to some excellent town centre overnight parking for camper vans for 10 quid. Close to the ferry terminal as well, and it's a lovely little town to have a wander around. After a good-natured warning on the ferry terminal that wild camping is not tolerated in the Hebrides whatsoever, we jumped on the ferry. It was around 2.5 hours to cross, and our tickets for all the ferries on the trip came to around about £250. Just as an aside here, this ferry journey in the evening, leaving Ullapool, was absolutely stunning with the views of the Highlands and the distance. Literally, you could feel like you could be anywhere in the world, whether it be Canada, Norway. Absolutely gorgeous, and a good reminder of how beautiful the Highlands are. So, good morning from the Outer Hebrides. So, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do a big trip this year. Reality and all that rubbish. But we were still trying to find somewhere we hadn't been in the UK. We've done a lot of travelling all over the country. And this place has become more and more popular, it seems, with people travelling. So we thought we'd give it a go. It's autumn. It's I think the 30th of September today. So yeah, a little bit off season, which is great. And yeah, should be a cool adventure in one of the UK's wildest places. So, after overnighting in a tolerated spot by the harbour, 10 quid for the overnight payable into the honesty box, something that's a theme as you travel around the Hebrides, we decided to start exploring the northeast part of the biggest of the islands. So if you watch videos about this area, then you're going to be sort of greeted by a bunch of superlatives about the different elements of the landscape. But one thing that is a constant theme as you're going through the islands are the stunning beaches, and they really are beautiful. So we proceed to then have a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of the top of the Isle of Lewis. It's a fairly compact island, probably about 20 minutes to drive across from Stornoway to the north part of the islands. Head to the Butt of Lewis, somewhat unfortunately named maybe, but it is apparently the wildest place in the UK. Also, as you're travelling through, you'll see just numerous sort of callbacks to the history of the place, the agricultural, the rural history, and what makes the island special. So another common theme is links to Viking and Norse history, and in fact the islands were owned by Norway into the 13th century, so way past 1066 for the Hebrideans. After some more stunning driving, we arrive at the Black House village. Now these are traditional residences based on Scandinavian longhouses. This particular village was still occupied up until the 1970s, and it's an interesting exhibit to see how people would have lived in those times and prior to that. And if you've got terrible taste in TV, one of these blockhouses was also in the Call the Midwife Christmas special a few years ago. Also interesting was the display on Harris tweed and the traditional machines used to make it. Didn't know this, but Harris tweed can be made anywhere in the Hebrides, not just in Harris. So next up for us are the Callanish Standing Stones, one of the most famous sites on the Hebrides. At 5,000 years old, these are older than Stonehenge. And again, at TV Link, they're said to be the inspiration behind the magic stone circle in Outlander. So another night and another beautiful seafront stop. Cliff Beach was gorgeous. Again, tolerated parking, 10 quid a night, and you can hardly sort of imagine a nicer spot to spend the evening in. So on to another famous must-see site, the Sea Stacks at Manchester, and again, absolutely gorgeous, quite reminiscent, this area, of the west coast of Ireland, which does make sense, the Atlantic side, and another beautiful, beautiful place to visit. So then it's a few miles down the coast to Uist Bay, and they're quite determined here that it's the Uist chessmen, not the Lewis chess pieces. No one knows exactly where they were found, but it was in this location somewhere. So, it's the third evening that we've been on the Hebrides. We've completed our loop of Uist, which was really interesting place actually. Pretty much seen most of what there is to see. We didn't have a very successful day today. Gorgeous start of the day where we woke up down on Cliff Beach, and then lovely lunch obviously, which you've seen the drone footage from, but unfortunately a couple of things were closed down, or certainly not operating at normal hours. So there's an Iron Age village in Boster, I think it is, which was closed temporarily. Stornoway then we went through to, having plans to go to the museum, which shut just as we got there. And then as my backup plan, I'd found a craft beer place run by the Hebridean Distillers Company, but that was closed today. So yeah, been a bit unsuccessful in that sense. However, we've moved a little bit further south now. We are in the Isle of Harris. So a stunning drive then takes us to Uist Beach, and this place is stunning. A bit more expensive, 20 quid to stay the night here, but well worth it. There were facilities there as well which you could pay a little extra for, and I would be willing to bet it trumps most campsites in the UK. So, good morning from the Isle of Harris, South Harris to be exact. We're on the road to Luskentyre Beach at the moment, although I don't think we're going to go down there. And the reason for that I'm about to show you. So, obviously it's a bit of a lottery. If you're coming to Scotland in September, October time, you can't guarantee the weather's going to be good. We've had amazing weather. Even people we spoke to from the island said it's probably been the best weather they've had all year. Not today. So we're here in Leverburg, parked next to the ferry terminal, such as it is. It's not a big terminal, but handily, right next to us in this horrific day of bad weather, is the Isle of Harris Brewery. So we went in there, had some really good food, so thoroughly recommended, but also choice of different beers, and we got to try the Isle of Harris distillery whiskies, which were fantastic. So we've had a day and a half of absolutely horrendous weather, unfortunately, but we've been really lucky, like I said before, but it's really opened up a bit. So our ferry goes about 5 o'clock tonight from Leverburg, so what we are just having a little spin around the area now to look at a couple of pieces of scenery that we didn't see yesterday, and we just stopped off at the seal viewing point, and there are seals, so yeah, not misrepresented at all. So next up is the Leverburg to Berneray journey by ferry. Now this costs around about 20 quid on its own, although we bought it as a package with the rest of our tickets, and takes around about 80 minutes. Good morning from North Uist. We spent the last night at Clachan Sands, which is beautiful, but the weather's been a bit inclement again. So luckily it held off a little bit for the ferry crossing, though it was a bit choppy. But this is another tolerated camping place, 10 quid for the overnight, and an absolutely beautiful spot. It's really quiet down here. We've had a couple of dog walkers this morning, and that's about it. Another lovely overnight stop, 10 quid a night here in North Uist. Beautiful spot. We're on Loch Maddie. And yeah, these little kind of local trust campsites, or camping places they are really, are a real godsend. So for 10 quid, obviously, you know, it's not free, but at the same time you're getting somewhere where you're tolerated to park. We haven't had any issues whatsoever. They're quiet this time of year as well. I can understand why, looking at the infrastructure around here. I'd imagine in the summer when if they've got people trying to wild camp here, it would be absolute nightmare. It just isn't set up for that at all. So yeah, great to have this facility at least. So, absolutely glorious day today. Gonna try and make up for a couple of days of lost time we've got now. Another beautiful beach. So after a lovely quiet night again, where we were the only residents, not for the first time in our little tolerated parking spot, we entered the last full day on the Hebrides. Well, hello from Loch Maddie ferry terminal. Loch Maddie was where we stayed, not last night, the night before, I think. We drove all the way down to South Uist, believing that we were going to be catching a ferry down there, but we've been redirected up here. Third time lucky, we hope. First ferry was supposed to go to Mallaig. That got cancelled, and then we were told we were going to go to Oban instead, which did surprise us because we couldn't get a booking into there when we tried originally. And then 2 days ago we had a text come through saying that ferry's been cancelled, so now we're going to Uig in Skye instead. So quite a good lesson learned there, I think. If you're going to come travelling in the Outer Hebrides this time of year, be prepared for disruption. Okay, so I just wanted to do something which we don't normally do, but just a little postscript really to the video. I've been back editing it this week, looking back on some really good times in the Hebrides, but I thought it was worth maybe just mentioning. I mean, clearly van travelling on the Hebrides is a slightly contentious issue. The fact that we were warned on the ferry before we went over about, you know, not taking the mick, basically. Our findings were, the time of year we went, we were absolutely fine. In most of we had very little difficulty finding places to park. I think there was one time where we had like a suggested place on search for sites, and when we got there it wasn't any good. Apart from that, everything turned out fine, and there does seem to be a real effort there for them to provide services so people aren't taking the mick. So I think it's always the case, really, isn't it? You know, if people don't take advantage, then it's not going to be more contentious than it already is. People just need to be responsible when they travel, which goes without saying, or really should. But unfortunately, even we saw while we were away, you know, areas where people, you know, where it's tolerated parking, but there were areas you weren't allowed to stay overnight, and people just pulled up there and stayed there anyway. Unfortunately, as with any community, some people just take piss, basically. But, you know, we didn't have any trouble. We were welcomed everywhere we went. It is a very different place to travel. I mean, we saw a handful of pubs in the entire time we were over there. There's a lot of very rural, remote areas. So, you know, it's something that you probably need to look into before you go. It might not be for everyone. I mean, in terms of location, it's beautiful. You know, it's such a gorgeous sort of landscape there, and changes a huge amount of variety. Weather-wise, we were lucky. Apparently, it's not always the case, but, you know, can't complain. End of September, start of October. And yeah, when we parked up, you know, we made sure we paid if that's what you were asked to do. I mean, they're honesty boxes, so be honest and pay up. And we benefited from some of the loveliest parking spots we've ever had. So, yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of going over, if you're going to go over in the peak of summer, be prepared for difficulties probably parking. There's not a massive infrastructure there. There were a couple of areas where we could empty our chemical toilet for free and stuff like that, which was great. But in terms of parking up, you know, each of those tolerated places, you probably have a handful of vans in there. So yeah, you know, just bear in mind really some of the challenges you're likely to face when you visit. But visit, because it's amazing.